We'll begin with your moderators. So I'm happy to introduce my co-moderator of this panel, Dr. Jenny Mai Fan. Dr. Fan is an incoming Assistant Director of Community Engagement at the Center of Adaptive Systems of Brain-Body Interactions and a Research Assistant Professor at George Mason University. She's a distinguished researcher and data scientist who specializes in behavioral endocrinology, psychology, and human development with a particular focus on autism. As a late diagnosed autistic adult herself, she brings a unique and invaluable perspective to her work, and her work aims to empower and support individuals on the autism spectrum, fostering a more inclusive and understanding society.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jenny, and I'm also very honored to introduce my co-moderator, Kim Chua. Kim is a dedicated advocate for disability and neurodivergence, with a strong focus on empowering marginalized voices within the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander community. As a social impact designer, co-founder of the AANHPI Collective, and creative director at the Asian Americans with Disabilities Initiative, Kim works tirelessly to reshape perceptions and enhance access to culturally informed resources for individuals with disabilities and neurodivergence. And Kim's journey through her own experiences as a late diagnosed ADHD individual with depression has fueled her passion for advocating for others. And her academic background is in public health policy from the University of California, Irvine, and it's equipped her with the knowledge and tools to address systemic disparities and create meaningful change.
Thank you, Jenny. And now we will be introducing our panelists. So please join me in welcoming Dennis Tran, co-founder of AANHPI Collective, a social impact agency, as we mentioned before, empowering disability and neurodivergent communities. Dennis also serves as the Director of Partnerships at Asian Americans with Disability Initiative, also known as AADI, Uplifting Disabled Asian American Voices. And Dennis, you want to say hi for a quick moment?
Yeah, hi everyone. Glad to be here and just sharing my insight at part of the Impact panel.
Thank you, Dennis. And our next panelist is Selena. Forgive me for I may mispronounce your last name, Tupo Fulifai. Thank you. A neurodivergent Tongan American activist, designer, and social entrepreneur. As a mother to a daughter with autism, Selena's personal experiences drive her advocacy for normalizing neurodiversity within the AANHPI community. If you want to say a quick hello, Selena.
Thank you so much for having me. It's truly an honor, and I'm really grateful to be here and have this very important discussion. So thank you.
And I have the great honor of introducing Hari Srinivasan. Hari is a PhD neuroscience student at Vanderbilt University, and Hari's research focuses on autism sensory issues and has won many distinguished awards, including the NSF Graduate Research Fellow, a PD Sorrells Fellow, and a Neurodiversity Inspired Science and Engineering Fellowship. And is very well known in the autism advocacy community. And Hari, would you like to come on and say hi to everybody?
Hi, everyone. Great to be here.
Thank you. And then next, I would like to introduce Ben. And Ben VanHook is an autistic master's student pursuing a degree in public policy at also George Mason University, and focuses on education policy. Ben has been critically involved with many disability advocacy organizations and is a well sought out public speaker on issues concerning intersectionality as well as disability and autism. Ben, would you like to come on and say hi to everyone?
Yeah, thank you. Pleasure to be here, and thank you all for attending.
Great, thank you, everyone. And for that, we'll share the first question to all our panelists. And the question is, what does it mean to be an AANHPI self-advocate? Can you share how you identify as and how that intersects with being on the autism spectrum, as well as could you share your journey to becoming a self-advocate?
And we'll start with Hari and then Dennis, Selena, and then Ben.
Hi everyone. I will start out with a quick but important accessibility issue. Image description. I'm brown-skinned, young man of South Indian origin, wearing a blue shirt and a cap that says Vanderbilt. My background shows brain neurons as I'm now a budding neuroscientist. Being a self-advocate of color means navigating the unique intersection of cultural expectations and personal identity while striving to promote understanding and belonging within both the broader community and our specific cultural context. For me, this journey involves embracing my South Indian heritage while advocating for autism solutions and belonging. I've had the diagnosis of autism and ADHD since age 3. Mine was regressive autism in that I was meeting all the developmental milestones till age 18 months, including being able to talk, make eye contact, and point and easily socialize, only to lose all those skills. I grew up in Cupertino, home to Apple computers in the San Francisco Bay Area in California. My city had a huge Asian and South Asian population, chock full of highly qualified Silicon Valley professionals, which meant most families there were on a single-minded mission that led to Ivy League education for their kids. My visible disability, combined with the stigma attached to anything that looks different, made me an outlier. For the tiger parents in my neighborhood, my presence would be a distraction to their high-achieving kids that, God forbid, autism may be catching. Essentially, I never got included in anything the kids in my neighborhood did. However, every Halloween, I would see them at my doorstep, demanding candy from me. The irony. Honestly, Halloween is my least favorite holiday as it's a painful reminder of exclusion. To give you another example of the pervasiveness of stigma, the family of an autistic child in the neighboring city of Sunnyvale got sued by their neighbors as an autistic kid would lower property values. They ultimately had to move. It is extremely hard for special ed kids to be mainstreamed in high-achieving school districts because including special education kids in mainstream classrooms may lower school rankings, and these parents have paid premium prices for living in a high-ranking school district. The life of an autistic child is literally pitted against the profit and ambition of the NT world. Many of these high-achieving school districts prefer to send the autistic kids away to private segregated special education-only schools, rather than mainstream them with other NT kids within the school district. I am proud of my rich South Indian cultural heritage, all its myriad traditions and profound understanding of spirituality. But socially, outside of my extended family, reality is that I still exist only on the periphery of my ethnic community. You grow up in this bubble that is adjacent to, but not quite overlapping the main group. It's this little closed bubble of other families of disabled children like you. I will add the caveat that there are a few amazing exceptions to the above, but they are a minority. Problem is that the NT kids who grew up excluding you, even if it was influenced by their families, will become adults who will exclude you, and they may pass on those values to their children too. So the cycle may continues. For instance, I remember going with great excitement to the Indian Student Association event in college. Not surprisingly, I was the lone person on the side of the room, watching the others. These guys don't know how to socialize with disabled folks, because they never had that exposure. That's why disability needs to be more visible on campus, because the college years really help shape the worldview of NT students. Exclusion from our ethnic community is of course on top of being excluded from mainstream society. I think this all highlights the ableism entrenched in societal attitudes. For sure, my world has opened up quite significantly with college, but I question if it has really moved the needle on belonging. For sure, I get to interact on a professional level and many people reach out now, but it's usually because they want something from me. Of course, no one is expected to spend every day with you. But how many are inviting you into their homes or to be a part of other significant events in their lives or involving you as part of their regular social community? I don't just want to be the recipient of volunteering either and make someone else feel good about what a great soul they were for including me. I want to be there because they want me there and accept me there. That is what belonging is. Education did not mean my disability challenges magically disappeared. But education has given my life purpose and meaning. Education gives me a seat at the table so that I can engage in advocacy and get to talk about stuff like this. Most importantly, I hope that I can make use of education to get us to solutions and change attitudes. Lots of work left to be done and miles to go before we sleep. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Hari, for sharing your experiences. So a little bit about me is I'm a Vietnamese American wearing a black shirt and wear black glasses, black hair. So how I identify with like the autism community is I'm a late identified autistic ADHDer, Vietnamese American, and my journey with disability and neurodivergent especially came upon like the past few years of kind of coming to terms with my autism at the time, and I didn't have like a lot of resources to support myself growing up in a low income traditional Vietnamese American family as a child of immigrant and come from low income background. Like there was like my family was always kind of surviving most of the days kind of spent at work. So kind of for me, it's like there's not a lot of terminology in terms of like what autism is, what this is, and what is considered to be in conversation about that. And these are the type of things that was never really discussed. So it was always kind of things that were really pushed aside. And the only representation I had growing up was my dad, who was kind of was someone who was compared a lot to growing up. When he was like still alive, was kind of when it was like, oh, like he struggled with do certain tasks or certain skills, or he struggled with like eating certain type of food, and I also struggled eating certain type of food, especially with vegetable and such like, things like that. And those are type of those nuances that I grew up with, and always met with shame and stigma in the community that way. And for me, that's where it kind of just led into path of like of the perception I have for myself at the time growing up, and and how I kind of navigate through school and work is always that distinction for myself. And I think for me, becoming a self-advocate, I was always considered an advocate of myself, whereas in school where I stand up to bullies or kind of like, or where it's like advocating for my place in the university when I was put on probation because the system was very inaccessible for me and never considered what my mental health was at the time or the pressure at those times. I think like what the most pivotal moment for me and how I became a public figure in the public speaking realm today and just being an advocate for other is through seeing other people sharing their story and experiences and seeing representation in media that showcased a different way of living and showcasing of like people with disability actually like contributing meaningfully in society. They're thriving in life, and I think those representation really help change my perspective in a way that showcased me that hey, there's a different way of living. I don't have to live a survivalist mentality that I grew up with from an immigrant way of navigating the world. And from there, I just kind of have pivoting that where I kind of work with life coaching to shift that perspective and just heal through what I kind of know of when as disability neurodivergent, and then sharing my story openly with other and connecting with other people, and that what led me into the advocacy space today.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to piggyback off of both Dennis and Harry. And first off, I'm Polynesian. I'm Tongan American. So for me, I guess what it means to be an AANHPI self-advocate means to find a way to secure a seat at the table, right? And what does that look like? For me, I was diagnosed with ADHD, I think when I was age 13. And at the time it was just ADD then. The Polynesian culture sort of collectively is a very collective and sort of village-like culture. So any sort of deviation from that, not necessarily welcome like within our community. And so humility is also something specific to the Tongan culture that was very sort of embedded into our everyday. And so things that I was interested in, things like theater, things like public speaking, very sort of not typical for Polynesian American when I was growing up. And so I think to be a self-advocate for me really meant to sort of embrace what made me different, but in a way that was also sort of, I guess, culturally competent for where I was at. Yeah, and thank you.
And for me, to be a self-advocate is to go against the status quo and to defy the odds, especially as an AAPI member. I'm very proud of where I came from To begin with, I'm only the 8th ever international adoptee from my home province in China when I was brought to the United States on July 3rd of 2000. I was abandoned in 1999 in a train station in Harbin, China, which is the capital of Heilongjiang. And I was just left there not knowing my name, family, or birthday. I currently identify as a Chinese-born Jewish Asian ADHD adoptee, and there are a few ways in which my identities intersect, both positively and negatively. For example, much of my advocacy work has been subconsciously driven by my Jewish upbringing and many Jewish values I uphold. The Jewish values of kavod, which is respect, tikkun olam, which is repairing the world, tzedakah, which is charity, and gemilut chesed, which is loving kindness, are all present in the work I do as I advocate for the basic respect and decency of the personhood of disabled people. The values of tikkun olam and tzedakah are demonstrated through hundreds and thousands of hours of unpaid advocacy work after my day job. And these values really help me empathize with others and create a sense of community. Intersectionality also has some negative effects on me sometimes. For example, it sometimes feels like a paradox, as the more identities you have, the less you feel like you belong to any set community and the less people are able to empathize with you. It's kind of like a dating app. Just like you have many, many more potential matches if you just search for singles in the United States, you would have more matches if you, or more people who connect with you if you just say, I am looking for autistic people. I am autistic without like having the filters of being Asian, being Jewish, being an adoptee. So just having more and more identities can really feel isolating and alienating, because even people within the autistic community might not know what it's like to be adopted, or might not know what it's like to face xenophobia or face racism or certain types of discrimination. So it can sometimes feel isolating being a part of so many marginalized groups.
Thank you so much to our panelists for sharing your experiences. As everyone heard, there's a lot of diverse experiences being a self-advocate and Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about your experiences. So thank you so far for sharing.
Hey everyone, and now I'll move on to individual questions. So first is Dennis. Can you share more about your journey as the co-founder of AANHPI Collective and Director of Partnerships of the Asian Americans with Disability Initiative, also known as AADI, and how these experiences have shaped your advocacy for disability and neurodivergent communities?
I think so. Like the one of the main thing for me, like, it's like creating spaces and community for things that I grew up didn't have. It's like kind of being the representation I never had, or like trying opportunity that I didn't have. Like for the past few years of navigating through my like diagnosis of ADHD, autism, and kind of having that sense of understanding made me realize that, hey, I wasn't alone in my journey after all when I kind of put my story out there for the first time. And I realized that through these intersections, there was like not a lot of research or data out there. There's not a lot of community support out there. And I was reluctant to actually find community and support in like the people I just stumbled across like these past few years, like, who are having to be late identified, neurodivergent, ADHD, autism along the way. And I was like, huh, there's more of us out there, but there's not a lot of community support and there's not resources. And a lot of like the representation I had growing up was mainly of like, I mentioned before, like just my dad, or like just seeing how like there's so much shame and stigma talk about with disability as like you're not worth as much, or like there's like, that there's no potential in people with disability, or like people are like very much like, shame and guilted upon for who they are. And for me, it's like I realized that, hey, I accomplished so much like in a short amount of time growing up. I graduated from college. I was able to kind of work and do work, and so I was still young in my like late 20 at the times, and now it's like I'm in 30 now. So they were like, hey, I could do so many things, and it's like, why is like society so limiting? And I think this opportunity came along where I was like, hey, like I have a voice, and I've been able to kind of share my story. People resonate with it, and now it's like it's time I wanted to kind of do something about it, and I want to kind of make an impact on it. And this is like the kind of impact that I always wanted to do, but I didn't know what it was. And for me, being a part of like the community, being a co-founder to kind of help shift the narrative, help to kind of like create a opportunity where I can just like power the community, future generation of like providing resources where I wish I had growing up, and creating that community spaces where people can feel a sense of belonging, where they feel community, where of course being from a AANHPI background, it's like we don't have any of that stuff. It's like, and it's all like, and it's all like something that we have to try and create collectively as you know, like rising disability advocates and leaders in the space, and just, you know, and just help build a path for ourselves, but not creating a space for ourselves, but also creating a space for others as well along this journey.
Thank you, Dennis. And on to Selena. How has your experience as a mother to a child with autism shaped your perspectives on neurodiversity and the importance of early intervention and accurate diagnosis?
Again, I'm going to piggyback off of Dennis because I have no original answers, so I'm just joking. Really, I think what it is again, it's trying to create the representation that, you know, that I didn't have myself. Also sort of having like an intrinsic understanding of what it feels like to be different, what it feels like to not have those supports, right? And to figure out what is it that I can best do to support my child so that they can navigate this world to the best of their ability. And I think for me, having an acceptance of that, right? Deviating away from what neurotypical children are and what they're like, and you know, maybe how easy their potential future can be. Thinking about my daughter and where she stands, she's nonverbal, for instance, and figuring out what I can do for her so that she can make the most of her life. And I'm so inspired just, you know, by the other panelists for that very reason. I think early diagnosis is key in that once that you're able, this is with anything in life, once you're able to sort of identify, you know, what the issue is, not that autism is an issue, but once that you're able to identify it, then, you know, I can sort of work to implement those supports there for her. So I think that's sort of been the most, I guess, crucial part of my journey thus far. And also trying to figure out and navigate that when I didn't have those things for myself, right? So yeah, I think that's sort of been my journey with her. Also just appreciating and understanding the beauty in her perspective and the way that she sees the world. I think neurodivergent people are fabulous and creative and just sort of have this intrinsic sense of justice. And so figuring out for me how I can sort of nourish that in her. So I think early diagnosis is of utmost importance, specifically for my community, in that we don't quite have the capacity when it comes to our own sort of medical treatment, when it comes to our own sort of mental health. So figuring out how do we navigate that as a community so that we can be there for our children? Because again, we're a very sort of a collective culture and a collective community. And I firmly, you know, believe that obviously that children are the future. So in what ways can we support our kids so that they can in turn sort of support us? And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Selena, for, yeah, as I always wonder, had I been diagnosed as a child rather than late in life, what my life trajectory would look like and how that intersects with my Asian American identity too. I'm sure there are others who can relate to that too if they have been late diagnosed. So thank you for sharing and agree about early diagnosis. So my next question is for Hari. So Hari, can you share your experiences and reflections on being featured on President Obama's Instagram on the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and how moments like these amplify the narratives of the disability community?
OMG, it was such an incredible honor to get featured by President Obama on social media. Getting acknowledged by President of the United States to me meant that even significantly disabled lives like mine are worth to society. Made me think, young man, you must be doing something right. Thank you, President Obama, for that nod of confidence. That time I was doing my undergrad at UC Berkeley. I've been involved in a number of things around disability, like I was writing disability autism-centered articles for the Daily Californian. I even got to interview the amazing Judy Heumann. I was president of the student art spectrum at Cal. I led team propaganda at the UC Berkeley Disability Lab. And I was running a weekly class on autism that I designed. So I guess I must have been doing some good stuff because I suddenly get this email from the producer of the virtual crip camp, commending my disability advocacy, which in itself was amazing, and that President Obama was going to do this social media event and wanted to include me. I think that social media post amplified the narratives of the disability community in several ways. First, it highlighted the importance of disability rights and the ongoing need for advocacy. It was the same year that the Oscar-nominated movie on the disability rights movement, Crip Camp, came out. Oh, I have to also mention that there was this discussion on Netflix that year between the folks who were part of the early disability rights movement in the movie and President Obama. And somehow in that discussion, my name got mentioned again. Imagine your name mentioned in the presence of such august company. Oh wow. Secondly, I think the fact of the social media event being on the occasion of the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, a cornerstone of disability rights legislation, underscored both the progress made and the work still needed. We have to realize that we still have a lot of work to do and many, many miles to go before we sleep. And can I slip in a mention here that I got invited to the White House and the Naval Observatory for the 32nd anniversary of the Act and got to shake hands with the President and Vice President. In terms of honor, it does not get better than that. Most important, I think, is that the social media event brought attention to the narratives of disabled individuals, showing that we are valuable members of society with unique perspectives, challenges, and talents. Let's not forget that the target audience for a US president's social media includes the huge world of non-disabled people from all around the world. So the influence of any post on such a platform is tremendous. There were 3 of us featured with different disabilities, and we all found different ways to contribute. Our narratives challenged stereotypes and demonstrated that disabled people can and do make meaningful contributions in various fields. Overall, I think it was a win-win for everyone. It re-energized the entire disability community and it pushed the bounds of what inclusion means for the non-disabled world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hari, for sharing that. I also remember that post and what happened afterward, and it was cheering you on the entire time. So thank you for sharing and also being such a strong advocate for our community. Okay, so my next question is for Ben. Ben, what challenges have you encountered in your advocacy work, and how have you overcome these challenges to create meaningful change for individuals with disabilities?
One of the biggest challenges in advocacy that I faced is the lack of appreciation for or understanding of intersectionality. My good friend, Dr. Stephen Shore, once said, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. This perfectly encapsulates the importance of acknowledging and understanding intersectionality. The needs, supports, barriers of one community and individual can vary significantly from that of another. An Asian neurodivergent, for example, has a fundamentally different worldview and lived experience than a white autistic and faces many additional barriers than white neurodivergents. For example, a white disabled person might have to mask, but an Asian person who is autistic might have to mask while simultaneously dealing with racism, xenophobia, discrimination, and the like, especially at the height of COVID. That was probably the hardest time for me because I was afraid to kind of go outside and I was afraid to really be in public with all of the hate towards Asian Americans at that time. But throughout advocacy, I've noticed that many of the most prominent disabled content creators on LinkedIn and Instagram are white, and many of the most well-known public speakers and disability rights activists from Temple Grandin to Stephen Shore are also white. And I think if the Nothing About Us Without Us movement is to be believed, we need to be offering seats at the table to all disabled people of all intersections, not just the privileged. I think the suppression of these voices and platforms of multiply marginalized communities is really harmful because it takes away role models for younger people with autism and other disabilities. And role models can be so important to our community, especially with how stigmatized disability is. It's often seen as taboo, or it's seen as something to be ashamed about or embarrassed of in the Asian culture or the Chinese culture in particular. And having a role model, having someone who's outspoken about disability and someone who isn't ashamed to be themselves can be really beneficial in starting these conversations around early diagnosis, starting conversations around supports, and just talking about disability in general for the Asian community. So I think suppressing these voices just really does harm when we should be raising up and elevating and amplifying the voices of marginalized communities, because if we support the most marginalized, we're supporting everyone.
Thank you, Ben, and very much on the complexity of the nuances as AANHPI with autism or with neurodivergent disability. There's many factors to it. And I actually want to thank you for also speaking out loud on LinkedIn. You're one of the voices I like to follow. And as you mentioned, outspoken narratives are part of our role models and what helps us like really tackle on the stigma and the shame that comes with it. So for our next question, goes to Dennis. As someone who identifies as queer, partially blind, identified, ADHD, autistic, neurodiverse, Vietnamese American, how do your intersecting identities inform your approach to advocating for neurodiversity inclusion within the disability space?
Yeah, it's just jumping off of like what Ben mentioned earlier, is it's kind of like there's this layer of like when it comes to growing up like in AHPI community here in the US, like there's this kind of concept of the minority myth where like all like Asians are perpetualized or kind of like ostracized into like one category or put into a box where they have to be identified as like majority or kind of resonate of like East Asian culture, where it's like you know, like it's all Asians kind of are like well-rounded, they're more like good at math, and they kind of have all these traits, and that makes up who they are, but they kind of dismiss like these other component of like Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Island communities, that we're not just like all similar, we're all like not monolith, like all of us like are just like we're very diverse, and we have a lot of different ethnic groups that make up who we are, and these are just the certain type of things that like consideration of that, and as we mentioned about just because you meet one person with autism, you only meet one person with autism is the same thing, where like the disability community, the neurodiverse community, the autism community is very diverse in its own way, and you have to think about that. You have to consider all these intersectional parts that make up who they are as well, that shape up who they are, where they're coming from, how they grew up, their environment, their culture, you know, their gender, sexuality, and like they also belong into other community groups or have other disability that they are associated with as well, that and mental health challenges that associate with all that stuff is kind of shape of who they are. So kind of think of it as like we're all human being that has like we are associated with we're pretty multifaceted humans, and that to consider like supporting people with disability and neurodiversity is to consider taking it more like a whole, really looking at things more holistically, thinking from a wide range of different perspective of just perception of like person who they are, and just not thinking linearly of like very much black and white of like this is who you are, just what you see is what you it's known, but there's more layers to that person than what it can also be. So always kind of be curious about that, and always kind of help that to inform your decision making of like what type of policy you want to support for people with disability and neurodiversion, what type of how to accommodate people for accessibility and accommodate in the workplace. It's like one, for example, it's like if you want to like support someone with accommodation, it may be differ from one person to another. So you have to kind of get to know that person and just understand them and just kind of work closely with them and just kind of see like what 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 is best to kind of support them. How can you support them better versus like another person, autistic person may have a different type of accommodation and needs met. So it's just thinking in those type of lens and perspective. And through these intersectional identities, it's like for me, for myself personally, is to be the representation that I always wish to kind of see for others, but also kind of being that change reflected in myself, but also being that change to which I see in the world for others as well. And through the work that I do in the advocacy space is to kind of like think about these intersectional lens and approaches, but also kind of like staying curious and always questioning the norms of things and just like kind of be like, oh yeah, like putting all the pieces together and component of what makes each individual who they are and themselves. And I think that's like the key thing with the advocacy space and how to inform better neurodiversity inclusion space for everyone.
Thank you, Dennis. Yes, thank you for sharing. And also just mentioning, I think hearing about like the social model as well, where it moves the onus of the person and rather incorporates everybody as a human who's multifaceted, as you mentioned. So thank you for sharing. To the next question, Selena, your work is deeply informed by your lineage to Polynesian navigators. How does this cultural heritage influence your approach to creating supportive environments for families impacted by neurodiversity?
Well, first and foremost, I want to give everyone their flowers here. And can I preface the answer to my question by saying this, that neurodivergent people are literally responsible for the fundamental breakthroughs that we've had in society, like just in human nature when it comes to culture, science, technological breakthroughs. And so I think there's something to be said about that, especially, in the current cultural climate. But that being said, when I think of my heritage and I think of my lineage, being a direct descendant of a wayfinder, it kind of sort of mirrors when we talk about intersectional, right? My decolonization journey as well, being an Indigenous person in diaspora, living in the United States and trying to figure out how to navigate Western context and what does that look like. And so for me with that, when I think of just the principles of what wayfinding is, it's being very sort of introspective and having, I guess, being one with your intuition, which I think every person on the panel can sort of agree that that's something that as neurodivergent people, we have really sort of strong within us. It's a good sense of intuition, high pattern recognition, right? Those things. And so when I think about that and I think about what the purpose of, wayfinding was back then, it was to advance our people. It was to move our people forward. And it was to take a chance and to go someplace that you've never been before with the hope that you made it to wherever the destination was. And so when I think about that and where I'm at in my life in this moment, I try to mirror those same qualities. My community, I can only speak for Tongan Americans, at least here in the States, we're very sort of monkey see, monkey do. And for any sort of diversion off of the path of what's already been shown to us is sort of frowned upon. And obviously as a neurodivergent person, again, we go against the norms. We have a strong sense of justice and we question things. And so for me, I very much see myself being sort of a modern variation of the wayfinder and figuring out just in a multitude of aspects, what is it that I can do to take my community to the next level? I may not have been there before, but if I trust my intuition, if I watch what's around me and I sort of figure out how to navigate these cultural Western spaces, right, as an Indigenous person, my hope is that I have the ability to take my people with me. I think that's, in a socio-economic sense, I think that's, when it comes to advocating for neurodiversity, I think it's a lot of things for me, right, when we discuss intersectionality. So I think being a wayfinder very much hugely impacts every sort of decision that I make, not just for myself, but for others as well. And Yeah, sorry, I was kind of going off on a tangent, but thank you for the question.
No worries. That was great. Thank you, Selena. I'm likely not alone when I say that I don't recall through K to 12 education learning very much at all about Pacific Islanders, Polynesian culture. And this is why I feel representation in these spaces really, really matter. Representation like Selena's right now, with people in her culture to speak about issues that matter and are important. So thank you so much, Selena, for being here and speaking up. So my next question is for Hari. Hari, as a NSF Graduate Research Fellow, a PD Soros Fellow, and a Neurodiversity-Inspired Science and Engineering Fellow at the Frist Center for Autism and Innovation, how do you promote inclusivity and accessibility in higher education and research environments? And could you elaborate on the significance of neurodiversity-inspired science and engineering in addressing their unique needs and challenges, and then describe how your research contributes to this field?
I approach learning and knowledge with curiosity and passion, and absolutely enjoy my hard-won access to mainstream education. I went into college at UC Berkeley hoping I would somehow make it to a degree stage, but then got all this unexpected super delicious icing in the form of honors, like being a Haas Scholar, University Medal finalist, and getting a prestigious PD Soros Fellowship. When there is disability or disabilities involved that impact you on multiple fronts, you are also putting in an incredible lot of extra physical effort to get stuff done. I will not sugarcoat the challenges aspect of disability. You literally have to work longer and harder compared to your peers. And my disability can feel like a leaky boat, so you are never sure what kind of day you will wake up to. I think that all the awards I received serve as validation of my efforts and also act as pads of encouragement that I must be doing something right, that perhaps even significantly disabled individuals like me have worth, and get to follow our dreams and passions and lead a life of purpose and meaning. The Frist Center for Autism and Innovation was what really drew me to do grad school at Vanderbilt. I'm now a neurodiversity-inspired science and engineering fellow at the Frist Center. I think my presence in higher ed in of itself shows possibilities across the spectrum. I don't represent the profile of a typical college-going autistic, so I do have to constantly keep thinking of workarounds I can use so that I can get things done, but I don't have all the answers either. So that has been a challenge. That's why we need research to get to solutions so that inclusion is easier for a wider profile of autism. Disability accommodations need to be part of the fabric and not an afterthought. What drew me to research is the pivotal role of research. Research findings literally influence who gets priority in terms of funding and policy, who gets access to spaces, and it even influences societal attitudes. Research gets us to not just explanations, but also to solutions. This is why it's critical that we have autistic-inspired science and engineering research. Autistics need to be in the roles of researchers and not just subjects. I'm not saying we take over all of autism research because non-autistics also bring a lot of talent into research. The best research is collaborative between disabled and non-disabled. However, autistic insights may provide a nuanced understanding of autistic experiences that cannot be fully captured by observation or second-hand accounts. It also reduces the interpretation bias of results purely from a neurotypical lens. Autistics as researchers may also lead us to innovative approaches and thinking. For instance, one area I have talked about in my Time magazine is on who autism research leaves out. Traditional autism research tended to oversample this narrow set of easily researchable autistics and then insisted that those solutions applied to all of autism. That's why a lot of therapy or interventions don't work and we get written off as not improving when the problem was that we were not given the therapy or support or treatment that suited us in the first place. One of the goals I set out in my own research design was to make the research task very simple so as to include a wider profile of autistics, and I was able to come up with a novel and simple task that still had high ecological validity. This is an example of a lived experience influencing research. We can make research inclusive when we get around to thinking and doing something about it. My research lab is also looking into ways to adapt or modify existing equipment to make it more user-friendly to autistics across the board. I think my presence in the research community is a reminder that we need to expand our horizons so that we can get down to the business of solutions for a wider group. What many don't realize is that when you address the needs of the most marginalized members of a group, the whole group benefits. Just like elevators benefit not just wheelchair users, but the entire non-disabled world. And of course, having autistics as researchers means we tend to focus on research that is relevant and practical, which means that I will not be happy with just theories and explanations. I want my research to inform translatable solutions and applications because at the end of the day, we need quality of life. Recently, I received the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship Award, which feels very validating of my research efforts. I will be making use of some really cool tech gadgets provided to our lab by Meta Facebook. I hope to start pilot testing in fall and participants testing from spring semester. My research focuses on sensory systems in autism, specifically the peripersonal space. To explain my research to a layperson, think of peripersonal space as your personal bubble. This bubble helps you sense and react to things around you, and existing research suggests that this bubble is not as flexible in autism. My research aims to understand these differences better, and a longer goal is to develop strategies and tech to help autistics better navigate their spatial environment. This has important implications for designing better strategies, educational tools, and technologies that are tailored to the unique needs of autistics. Thank you.
Thank you, Hari. I know I will be watching closely and cheering you on along the way, and I'm excited to see the results of your work and how it's going to really support and help so many autistics across the entire spectrum. So thank you so much for doing this work, and congratulations on all these fellowships. So Ben, you're up next. My question to you is, how do you balance your roles as a student, advocate, and researcher? And what strategies have you found most effective in managing your commitments and advocating for your own needs? And then secondly, can you share the importance of neurodiversity in shaping education policy and how your expertise in this area informs your advocacy efforts to create more inclusive and supportive educational environments?
Yeah, thank you. The first question is a good one, especially given that all of my advocacy work occurs outside of working hours and is usually unpaid. It can be exhausting dedicating up to 30 unpaid hours a week to advocacy, including the weekends. I oftentimes start my day, this is a weekday, but I often start my day really early, so I leave work early. So my workday is from 5:50 a.m. usually to 2:30, which gives me 4 or so hours to engage in extracurricular advocacy activities. When it comes to in-person events, such as conferences or presentations, I typically have to schedule a half day or take a vacation day for the event, because taking that vacation day gives me enough time to mentally prepare for the environment, the commute, and what I'm going to say. As it relates to self-advocacy regarding my balance of my own needs with activism, it can oftentimes be very difficult and frustrating, especially when it comes to budgeting and in-person events, because many in-person events, such as conferences and summits around disability, just seem very elitist, and it just seems like they're actively trying to keep disabled people out of the conversation. As I'm just a grad student, I don't make much money. Unfortunately, however, many disability-related conferences and events are extremely inaccessible to people like me, as they require disabled speakers ourselves to pay money out of pocket to not just attend and speak, but to just support our community at these events. The unemployment rate of autistic people alone is around 85%, with the statistics around autistic people of color likely being much worse. This means that the most important demographic is oftentimes missing when it comes to supporting our community and bringing people to the table. A good example is the American Psychological Association's annual conference. This year it's in Seattle. I'm part of the leadership committee on Division 33, which is Autism and Intellectual Disabilities. And I was asked to serve on a panel at this conference. And I might also lead our first ever neuro inclusion special interest group. But I asked if there was any funding to help me with travel to the conference, and they basically said I had to fund my own travel as if I could afford it. So a lot of these conferences and talks and opportunities to support our community that bring together so many people from educators to employers to researchers, are just really inaccessible to us as disabled self-advocates. But going back to the question, it can be very hard managing my own needs, especially financially, because disability advocacy is my passion. And as Selena mentioned, we have an innate sense of social justice, which can sometimes lead me to forking over $600 to speak at an event. And I'm not really even mentioning the cost of hotels and flights. These are just like the attendance fees of these conferences. So my innate sense of justice often leads me to handing out more money than I probably should, given the cost of rent and the cost of mental health care therapy and food all of a sudden. So there's a lot of inaccessibilities when it comes to advocacy, and just being able to navigate these barriers can be really difficult for me. For the second question, could you share the importance of neurodiversity? Neurodiversity is really important for a few reasons when it comes to education policy. To start out with, neurotypicals, no matter how hard they try, can't really understand or empathize with the neurodivergent experience. They can't really embrace the feelings that accompany 24/7 masking, that accompany having a meltdown because of like the bright lights in the room, or because they have to sit still in a classroom. So having that lived experience can help neurodivergent policymakers empathize and better support our community through that empathy. There's also a lot of biases and stereotypes that can bleed through if there's no neurodivergent representation in leadership. And preventing these biases is crucial to creating a more inclusive society. And failure to do so, failure to implement positive and inclusive change in education can have long-lasting effects. Someone who's been bullied, teased, or name-called throughout their schooling education experience in elementary school, middle school, high school might be less likely to go to college because those experiences has been so traumatic for them. A failure to incorporate disability within a school's culture can lead to a distrust in authority. It could lead to feelings of friendlessness, loneliness, and isolation that can contribute to the common co-occurrence of anxiety and depression amongst disabled people. So disability representation is very important education policy, because non-disabled people just can't really understand that lived experience and can't truly empathize with our community and our needs.
So much for sharing your experiences. And regarding the conference accessibility, I'm really sorry that has been your experience, as I'm sure there are a lot of people with disabilities who experience a similar thing. But just want to quickly drop, we are talking about this very topic about accessibility and conferencing at the NIH that is coming up, and I'll drop the link in the chat if anyone wants to attend, add your input.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing your candid personal journeys in self-advocacy. Self-advocacy there definitely trials and tribulations to it, and that's been mentioned, a lot of difficulties that come with it. So I very much appreciate everybody on this panel, and my co-moderator as well, for lending your time and valuable insight to everyone here who's attending. Your stories are a reminder of the importance of fostering understanding, and that representation truly matters, and it will lead to inclusivity and fostering more understanding to the environments. In closing, I wanted to also drop a few links here. So thank you, Jenny, for dropping the link to the NIH conference as well. I will be dropping a link to AANHPI Collective, as well as the event page where you can connect more with our panelists and my co-moderator here for LinkedIn or Instagram. There's also going to be a website link to AANHPI Collective Instagram as well. And if you want to reach out to us by email, I will also be dropping a link to or also sharing here a survey about AANHPI disability and neurodivergence. The link is there, the QR code is there as well. I've also dropped into the chat. And this survey will help to better understand the awareness levels and examine the cultural influences regarding to disability and neurodivergence among AANHPI individuals. This is completely voluntary and anonymous, but we thank you so much if you're able to participate. Secondly, also sharing here a soft launch for a gallery that AANHPI Collective has curated. Thanks to the disabled and neurodivergent AANHPI community for sharing their stories and artwork. It shares their narratives of shattering the stereotypes, their experiences as well, and as a call to action about championing diversity as well as fostering acceptance. And we'll be adding more stories to this gallery as well. So thank you again to Dennis, Selena, Ari, Ben, and Dr. Jenny Mai. Van, thank you as well to the community collaborators of this event, AADI, Asian Mental Health Project, Autism Society, Entwine Community, NeuroTalentWorks, Very Asian Foundation, as well as the Yellow Chair Collective. And thank you all for joining again. Have a great day, everybody.